Central Time, that is. I know we have a lot more that are supposed to be joining us today, so hopefully they'll get on soon. My name is Sherry Burcham, and I am a family life educator with the University of Illinois Extension, and I want to welcome all of you that are getting on to the Autumn Health Picks series. We've had several of these sessions, and we will be continuing to have these into November. And this is a series, it's a collaboration between Illinois Extension and the Interdisciplinary Health Sciences Institute at the University of Illinois. And it's designed to connect those across the state, all of you, with researchers at the university, and to provide evidence-based educational program for you. So just a few housekeeping tips, as we always have before programs. One is that we would like you to have your videos off, even though we really want to see all your faces. It just helps with connectivity when we do this for so many people, because we're expecting to have a lot more. And also to please mute yourselves so we don't get that background noise. Another thing is I am going to actually launch a poll here and in a second. And when I do, if you would please answer the questions in the poll for us, and then you can just click out and minimize it off of your screen. So I'm going to do that now. We just have a few basic information questions we have for you here. So you should see this on your screen now. And if you could answer some of those questions for us, that'll be great. And when you're done, you can either click out or you can minimize the box and put the little minus at the top and get rid of it. There's about, it looks like 3 questions there. Okay, and I'm going to leave that up for a while for those that aren't in here yet to do that for us. Also, if you're seeking any CEUs or CPDUs as part of this program, we have a link for you that I'll put in the chat box here that if you haven't done so already, we would like you to click on that, and that will help you to check in and be able to get the credit that you are supposed to be getting for this. Get that in there. Okay, so it's in the chat box now, again, for CEUs and CPDUs. You want to click that link and then fill out the form to check in for the webinar, okay? And then you will actually receive a follow-up email with an evaluation that will need to be filled out, and that will help complete that process. So if you've done it before, you understand how that works, okay? All right, and if you're calling in and you're not actually in the computer, but you're calling in, you'll want to go to the website. It's go.illinois.edu/credits. If you put that in your browser, then you'll be able to access that as well. Okay, and if you have any questions during the program, we want the chat box to mostly be, if you have questions, we want to try to keep those extraneous comments and things out of there if we can, because again, we're supposed to have quite a few people in. So please type your questions in the chat box as you have them. And then if you're calling in, just hang on and hold those. We may answer them during the session. We may answer them at the end, depending on how the flow goes. So, but we will get to them. Okay. So now, without any more, I think that's it for our housekeeping. I want to introduce our speaker today. And our speaker today is Shelby Keye. And she is a second-year PhD student in the Kinesiology and Community Health Department at the University of Illinois. She completed her bachelor's degree in human nutrition, foods, and exercise in 2017 at Virginia Tech. And then she completed her master's in exercise science in 2019 at UMass Boston. She currently studies the effects of physical activity and exercise on cognitive and motor function in children. That's her focus. So today she's going to be talking to us about the current physical activity guidelines and using exercise to maintain our health across the lifespan. So with that, again, if you're just joining us, please, there is a poll that you should see. Please fill that out, and the forms are in the chat. And with that, Shelby, I'll let you take over. Thank you.
Thank you. So like Cherry said, I'm going to be talking to you all about the physical activity guidelines for all ages. We'll also be going over how to incorporate physical activity into your life. So just as a quick synopsis of who I am. So I went to Virginia Tech for my bachelor's degree and graduated in 2017. I studied human nutrition, foods, and exercise. After I graduated, I started my master's at UMass Boston. I dropped the nutrition and exercise or nutrition and foods, and I focused on exercise science. And now I'm currently a second-year PhD student studying the effects of physical activity and exercise in children and adolescents and how that affects their cognitive motor functions. So what we're going to be going over today is the physical activity guidelines for all ages. We'll discuss various types of activities to engage in and the benefits of more physical activity and less sedentary time or sitting time. And we'll also talk about how you can incorporate more physical activity into your life. So I first want to kind of understand where our audience is at in terms of how active you should be. So if you want to write in the chat and answer this question, how often do you think you should be physically active? So do you think you should be active every day, 30 minutes a day? If you have no idea, you can say, I have no idea. 30 minutes a day, okay, daily, every day. Okay, mixed bag between 30 minutes a day, 60 minutes a day. All right, cool. And I do have and we'll go over who's right and wrong in a second. I have a second question. So just a yes or no question, or maybe a maybe. Do you think you are meeting the physical activity guidelines, if you had to guess? Let's see. No's, some yeses, and absolutely. Wow, congratulations. Sometimes, mostly. Okay, all right. So definitely a mixed bag on that one. So if you answered no or you're not sure, don't feel bad, because only about 20% of American adults are actually meeting the guidelines as of 2016. So for men, it's a little bit more than women, but they're still both hanging around that 20%. So don't feel bad if you're not meeting those guidelines, because most people are not. So I'm first going to talk to you guys about how you talk about physical activity and how you plan for recommendations and guidelines. And most people use something called the FIT principle. So this stands for frequency, intensity, time, and type. So the frequency would be how often you're working out. So is it that once a week, 2 or 3 times a week, once a month? That's kind of the first step on talking about physical activity. The next would be intensity. So how hard you're working out. And we'll go over the different levels of intensity, but is it light intensity, moderate, vigorous? Where are you at in terms of your heart rate, stuff like that? Next would be time. And so that's exactly how it sounds, like how long you're working out. So 30 minutes, an hour, 45 minutes, 2 hours. And lastly, what type of physical activity are you doing? Are you doing aerobic activity? Are you doing a certain sport? And we'll go over the different types of physical activity as well. So this is kind of a theme that occurs when you're talking about physical activity, and this will come up later when we talk about the guidelines. So first I want to tell you guys about the physical activity intensities. So there's 3 types, and they range from a low amount of energy expenditure to a high amount of energy expenditure. So the first one is light physical activity. And this would be things like household chores, gardening, stretching, maybe a little bit of yoga, depending on the type of yoga. And so these are activities that can be easily incorporated into your day, going on short walks that are leisurely, stuff like that. Moderate activities are normally brisk walking, light jogging, maybe a leisure sport like volleyball, doubles, tennis, something where you are definitely getting your heart rate up, but it's not too much. It's manageable. And then the last one would be vigorous activities where you're really increasing that heart rate. You're doing most likely sports or sprinting, fast jogging, running, stuff like that. And so I'm sure a lot of you are wondering, like, how do I know what intensity I'm at while I'm being physically active? And so sometimes it's hard to tell based on what activity you're doing. So there's three main ways that you can measure your physical activity intensity. And the first way is the talk test. So asking yourself, can you sing or talk during or immediately after an activity? So I'm going to quickly go back to these intensities. So for light activity, you can most likely hold a conversation with somebody, or you can sing while you're doing it. So if you're cleaning, you're probably talking to somebody. If you're gardening with someone, you can easily have a conversation. Moderate activity, the talking becomes a little bit more difficult. You might be able to say a sentence here and there, but your breathing has definitely picked up and it's a little bit more difficult for you to talk. And then vigorous activity, you're most likely not talking at all. If anything, it's a word here and there, but you most likely have to catch your breath before you're doing any talking. So that would be the talk test. The next one would be your perceived exertion. And this is on a scale of 6 to 20 of how do you feel. And the reason why it's on a scale of 6 to 20 is because this corresponds or likely corresponds to your heart rate. So here we have the rating of perceived exertion. And so if you multiply any of these numbers by 10, that would likely correspond to your current heart rate during that activity. So light activity would probably be around an 8 up to an 11. Moderate activity would be, a 12 down to maybe a 16, and then vigorous activity would be 17 and higher. And so let's say, you're just sitting, your heart rate is likely at rest. So that would be about 60 beats per minute. So your rating of perceived exertion would be 6. Next is your heart rate. So you can, if you have a fitness tracker or you like to count your heart rate by hand, you can measure your intensity using heart rate. And so this is a chart from the American Heart Association. And it basically tells you based on your age, what your maximum heart rate would be. And so that would definitely be vigorous activity if you're reaching your max heart rate. And then moderate to vigorous is also between 50 and 85% of your max heart rate. So max heart rate is calculated 220 minus your age, which is why a 20-year-old's max heart rate is around 200 beats per minute. And so if they want to get up to the moderate to vigorous range, they'd want to be around 100 to 170 beats per minute. To be honest, I think the talk test is the easiest way if you don't have equipment, if you don't want to memorize a scale that starts at 6. I think the talk test is perfectly fine for assessing your intensity at that time. So next, we're going to talk about types of physical activities that you can be engaged in. So the first one is aerobic activity or cardio and endurance. And this is a lot of common activities that people are already participating in. So using your muscles in a rhythmic manner for a sustained period of time. So running, biking, walking, stuff like that would be aerobic activity. Next would be muscle strengthening activity. And so this would be your body's muscles working or holding against an applied force. So lifting weights, using resistance bands, even doing body weight exercises like push-ups or sit-ups when you're going up against a force would be muscle strengthening activities.
That's as loud as I can get it.
That's fine.
Bone strength activities would be activities that also use forces to promote bone growth and strength. So this normally involves impact with the ground. So this could actually be a mix of aerobic and muscle strengthening activities. So jumping rope, playing hopscotch if you're a kid, running has impact on the ground, even lifting weights leads to bone strengthening for your body. So this is a mixed bag and it's mainly muscle and aerobic activities. Balance activities would improve your ability to resist forces to prevent falls. So activities like that would, a really good one would be doing yoga, doing things on one leg, even things like building your core and strengthening your legs and your hips can help with your balance. So this girl down here is doing some hip thrusts and strengthening activities, and that's will also help with falls. So it doesn't have to be just practicing standing on one leg. You can do muscular activities as well to build your core. And then the last would be flexibility. So these would enhance your ability of a joint to move through its full range of motion. And so most of this would be stretching and maybe a little bit of yoga here and there. And so all these activities are different types of physical activities that you should be engaged in. And you'll see later in the guidelines that most of the activities that they talk about are the first three, so aerobic, muscular, and bone strengthening. But that doesn't make balance and flexibility any less important than these three. Okay, so just a quick history lesson. The first set of physical activity guidelines came out in 2008 by the US Department of Health and Human Services. And at that time, they decided that they will have a new set of guidelines come out every about 10 years, and those would be updated in between there. So we're still new when it comes to a consensus on the research with physical activity. So I just wanted you guys to understand that, what we're about to go into is just the second set of guidelines. So we still have quite a bit to go. So just a quick synopsis of the 2008 guidelines. It started with children 6 to 17, and they recommended to participate in 60 minutes of moderate to vigorous intensity activity and include muscle and bone strengthening activities at least 3 days a week. For adults, this would be people 18 and over to participate in 150 to 300 minutes of moderate to vigorous intensity activity in bouts of at least 10 minutes. And I want you guys to remember this last part, the bouts of 10 minutes. Participating in muscle strengthening activity at least 2 times a week. And then these guidelines applied for older adults, people with disabilities, women during and after pregnancy, and then adults with chronic medical conditions. So fast forward to 2018, these are our most recent guidelines. So this was the second edition, and there were a few changes, some of them bigger than others. And so we'll start with the first change, and that was including preschool children. So if you can remember, the guidelines started at 6 and now they start at 3. So that's really exciting for the younger child age group. So the guideline for them is to be physically active throughout the day. So in terms of the FIT principle here, it's not quite there yet, but we do know that physical activity does positively affect preschool age children. So they also say that parents or adult caregivers should encourage active play throughout the day and expose these children to a variety of age-appropriate activities. Now moving on to children and adolescents. So we're back to the 6 to 17-year-olds, and their guidelines didn't change. So we have 60 or more minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity daily. So these activities, they recommend for them mostly to be aerobic and also for children to hit that vigorous intensity activity 3 times a week. Also, they're encouraged to participate in muscle and bone strengthening activities 3 times a week. And so the reason for these is mainly to maximize children's growth and development. And we'll talk about the benefits in a little bit, but that's kind of the reason for this 60 minutes, and the muscle and bone strengthening is mainly so they can develop properly. And so these are the types of activities that the guidelines recommend for children and adolescents. So aerobic, muscular strengthening, and bone strengthening activities are the most important. And so a lot of these can be done with sports, recess, PE classes. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But these are some examples of activities that they recommend. I want to draw your attention to the lifting weights and resistance band section. So it has been debunked that lifting weights is bad for children. It's perfectly safe as long as they have the proper coach and they're using the proper equipment and the right form and everything. Children can start lifting weights as soon as 8 or 9 years old. And so if that's something that you as a parent or the child are both interested in, you're more than welcome to, look for ways to incorporate that into their life. If you are not comfortable with lifting weights or your child is not, there are plenty of sports that promote healthy muscular strengthening without that. And those would be sports like gymnastics, wrestling, martial arts, things where you have to lift up your own body a lot. Also, using a playground is really important for kids. If you have access to a playground, I highly suggest taking them there very often. There they can do a lot of different activities like running. They can promote bone strength by jumping up onto the jungle gym, things like that. Okay, and so now the benefits of physical activity for children and adolescents right now are improving their bone health and their weight status, their cardiorespiratory and muscular fitness, their health, as well as cognitive function and academic performance. And then it also has shown that physical activity can reduce the risk of depression and a depressed mood. And so these benefits are the ones that are in the guidelines. And so that means that there's been enough research to come to a consensus that for a fact, we know that physical activity improves these things. That doesn't mean that it's subject to just these things. So I imagine in the future, this list would get much longer and a little bit more specific. So before we move on to adults, I'm going to have everybody do a quick physical activity break, especially if you've been sitting a lot today. I know it's like the middle of the day and people are working, so you might have been sitting quite a bit today. So when I say go, I need everybody to stand up. You don't have to turn on your camera. You can do whatever you want. You can do jumping jacks, squats. You can do some stretching. You can practice your balancing, whatever you want. So ready and go. And I'm going to do some stretching because I have some back problems. So if you guys want to write in the chat what you plan to do, that would be pretty cool. And then once the bar comes off the screen, then we'll move on.
And Shelby, we have a couple questions.
Okay, sure.
Just that are related before we move on.
Sure.
One is the difference between target heart rate zone and the average maximum heart rate, what the difference between those would be.
Okay, so your target heart rate zone would be reaching the moderate to vigorous range. So moderate activity is not going to max out your heart's abilities, which is why it would be good to stay in that range. And then your maximum heart rate is basically the max rate that your heart can beat, if that makes sense, like the max ability that your heart can get to. So you don't always want to be there because that can end up, with some adverse events. But being in that target heart rate zone, the moderate to vigorous range would be a good zone to go for, if that makes sense.
Hey, thank you. And then someone mentioned, but you might be covering this, does walking actually improve bone strength?
Walking, probably not. More running, because you need that impact with the ground. So you need to create a little bit more energy and force. So the speed of running would create that force. I'm not sure if walking would help with bone strength. It might, but running would definitely be better.
All right, thank you, Coach.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we'll move on to the adult guidelines now. So this is for people 18 years and older. And the guidelines didn't change so much. So you have 150 to 300 minutes of moderate or 75 to 150 minutes of vigorous aerobic activity a week. The thing that is no longer there is the bouts of 10 minutes. So that's actually very encouraging because now we know that even if you exercise for only 5 minutes, that exercise is providing benefits for you and it can go towards the guidelines for that day. So that's to me, that's very exciting as a physical activity nerd. So 150 minutes would equal up to 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. So that is the bare minimum for the guidelines, 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. And here we can see the FIT principle really well. So the frequency would be 5 days a week if that's what you choose. The intensity is moderate or vigorous. The time is 30 minutes if that's what you choose, or you can do a little bit more. And the type of activity is aerobic activity. They also suggest muscle strengthening activities involving all major muscle groups 2 times a week. And so that would be legs, core, arms, back, and chest. And so you want to try to hit those at least twice a week as an adult. And like I said before, they dropped the 10-minute bouts. So now we know that you can gain benefits from any amount of moderate to vigorous physical activity. Lastly, they encourage adults to move more and sit less. And I want you guys to remember that phrase because I'm going to bring it up a little bit later. But definitely, this is something that you should leave this talk with, is move more and sit less. So now moving on to older adults, and this is people 65 years and older. And so the guidelines are pretty much the same, 150 to 300 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity a week. A couple differences here is that they encourage multi-component activities, including balance training. So these are activities that incorporate different types of physical activities. So if you are in a exercise class and they do muscle strengthening and aerobic exercise, then that's a multi-component activity. So most sports are multi-component, certain types of yoga are multi-component, and they include that balance training. So they also encourage aerobic and muscular strengthening. And then if an older adult has an injury or a chronic condition or disease and can't meet these guidelines, they encourage them to be as physically active as possible. And then always consult with your healthcare provider if you're trying something new or if you have a chronic condition or injury. Next would be pregnancy and postpartum. So they recommend that women who are pregnant or postpartum participate in at least 150 minutes of moderate activity a week. Aerobic activity is preferred, just like with the children and the adults. They also say that it's perfectly safe to continue doing your activities that you did before you were pregnant while you are pregnant. So if you were a runner before you were pregnant, you can still keep running while you're pregnant, as long as you consult with your healthcare provider and they say that it's good for mom and baby, then it's perfectly fine to continue those activities. And it's actually encouraged to continue and not stop. And lastly, our group is adults with chronic health conditions and disabilities. And so once again, same exact guidelines, 150 minutes to 300 of moderate to vigorous physical activity a week. So if one is able to, they also want you to participate in muscle strengthening activities twice a week. And if you can't meet these guidelines, just like older adults, then be just as physically active as your abilities allow you to be. And then always consult with your healthcare provider, especially once again, if you're trying something new. So these are some types of activities for adults. So these are the ones that they encourage: aerobic, muscular, and multi-component activities. And so some of these activities repeat themselves, like you can see yoga under muscle strengthening and multi-component, and that's because there's different types of yoga. You could be strengthening, you could do more stretching, it just depends on the class that you do. And then you also see exercise classes and sports. So it's a little bit easier for an adult to join an exercise class than a sport. They're just more available. And so if you really want to bring in those multi-component activities, I suggest taking exercise classes, either in person or online, especially nowadays with where we're at right now. So those are the types, and now we're going to talk about the benefits of physical activity for adults. So this is quite a list, but I wanted to bring all of these into the presentation just to visibly show how many benefits you can receive from being physically active. And like I said earlier, with the first set of guidelines for adults, any amount of moderate to vigorous physical activity will provide benefits. So even if you're not meeting the guidelines, as long as you are being physically active in some way, you're going to receive some of these benefits. The benefits just increase with more physical activity. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about certain ones on this list. So starting with all-cause mortality, cardiovascular disease, hypertension, and type 2 diabetes. So these all have very strong evidence related to aerobic physical activity. And that's just because they're related to your heart, your vascular system, your respiratory system. And so aerobic activity has very, very strong research evidence showing that it will lower the risk of all of these. Next, if you want to take a look at falls and fall-related injuries, I wanted to bring this up for any older adults in this talk, or if you're getting close to that older adult age. So physical activity is really important at this time because the risk of falling is much higher as you get older. But if you do those multi-component activities, if you're working on your balance, if you're building your core and your back and your legs, you will decrease that risk of falling. Fall-related injuries can be avoided also by doing muscle strengthening activities. Those would strengthen your bones and you're less likely to break a bone if you fall as well. Next, I want to talk about cognitive function. So physical activity has shown to improve things like memory, certain executive functions, and those are functions that help you with switching tasks or planning ahead. So cognitive function has been shown to be improved in both adults and children. And that's still a growing field. So this is actually new to the 2018 guidelines. Weight loss. So just as a disclaimer, these guidelines are not for weight loss. These are for maintenance and lowering these risks. Weight loss is normally comes not with just exercise, but also reducing your caloric intake. It would be really hard to lose weight if all you're doing is increasing your exercise and not changing your diet. So just want you guys to understand that weight loss can come with exercise, but 9 times out of 10, it's also paired with a decrease in caloric intake. And then lastly, I want to talk about bone health, especially for my older adults and women in the talk. So this is really important, especially for postmenopausal women, because your estrogen levels start to decrease and that affects your bone health. So if you start early in life or even during menopause or after, your bone health will be protected by doing muscle strengthening activities. So go and lift weights every couple of weeks, do some calisthenics where you don't have like body weight stuff like push-ups, sit-ups, squats, so you can maintain and possibly improve your bone health. Next, I'm going to talk about sedentary behavior. So I told you guys to remember that phrase, move more, sit less. So sedentary behavior is any waking behavior with a very, very low level of energy expenditure while sitting, reclining, or lying. So that would have been probably a 6 on that perceived exertion scale that I showed you guys at the beginning. Sedentary behavior, it does not currently have specific guidelines for Americans. It's a fairly new field, and so we're still learning a lot about it. But what we do know is that it increases your risk of all-cause mortality, cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and even some cancers. And so what they do recommend in these guidelines is to replace sedentary behavior with light, moderate, and/or vigorous activity. And so I want to draw your attention over to this graph on the right. So it kind of shows you your risk of all-cause mortality based on the colors. So the red would be a much higher risk and the green is a lower risk. And so what it's showing you is that an increase in daily sitting time can increase your risk. You're more likely to be in this red zone. And then incorporating moderate to vigorous physical activity may be able to counteract these effects and decrease your risk of all-cause mortality. So that's exciting. And I want to bring you down to the bottom left corner of this because this is where the physical activity starts to come in. And as you can see, it's not fully red here. It's a little bit orange, and then it doesn't take long for it to get into the yellow and green. So that goes with this theme of these guidelines, is that any amount of physical activity will provide benefits for you. So, you know, don't be down on yourself if you only did 10 minutes one week. It's better than 0 minutes at all, and you will have benefits if you participate in just a little bit of physical activity. It does not take long. So this chart also does not have numbers. So I'm not really sure where the guidelines fall. I do know that over here on the right is past the guidelines. The guidelines are probably somewhere in the middle right here. But even if you're below those guidelines, you're still in this yellow zone, which is better than being in the red zone. So I'm also going to talk to you guys about light physical activity. So there's no guidelines for light physical activity yet. I imagine this changing as well with sedentary behavior. And light physical activity is non-sedentary waking behaviors with a low level. So sedentary is very low, and this is just low. So probably on the rate of perceived exertion is 6 or 7. And so this is related to lower BMI and waist circumference, decreasing in all-cause mortality, improving cardiovascular health, and even related to certain mental health conditions like depression. And light physical activity is like leisurely walking, household chores, gardening, stretching, and yoga, like I mentioned earlier in the talk. And so these are really important because if you're not able to replace sedentary time with moderate to vigorous activity, you could at least attempt to replace that sedentary time with light physical activity by, standing up to do work or doing an extra chore here and there, starting a garden, whatever you want to do. So now I'm going to talk to you guys about how you can incorporate physical activity into your life. So we'll start with the individual level. So the first thing that you'll want to do is personalize the benefits of physical activity. So if you go back to the slide where I listed all the benefits, pick out 1 to 3 that are personal to you. So if you have a family history of type 2 diabetes, maybe you want to decrease your risk, or if you have poor sleeping patterns, you want to improve your sleep, something like that. So whatever it is, make sure it's personal to you. It's not related to society or somebody else. Next, you want to set personal goals based on those benefits. So if you want to decrease your, all-cause mortality, you could do some more aerobic activity. Or if you want to improve your bone health, then you could do some more muscle strengthening activities. And then lastly is to develop knowledge and skills. So if you're at this talk right now, well, everybody's at this talk right now, you're already doing this by learning about the guidelines, learning about what types of activities you should be doing. So pat yourself on the back for, filling in this circle for today, developing knowledge and skills, and continue to do research and learn about what would be best for you. So next we'll talk about incorporating physical activity into families and guidelines for caregivers. And most of these are going to be for kids, but these can definitely be applied to adults. So first you'll want to encourage safe and unstructured movement and play with young children. And so the guidelines for the preschool age children was just to be physically active throughout the day. So as a parent or a caregiver, encourage your kids to be active throughout the day. And this actually builds a good foundation for healthy habits in the future. They'll be used to moving around. They're going to be more interested in it as they grow up. Active play is really important for kids, structured and unstructured physical activity during and after school. So this is mainly for my teachers, administrators, any parents that are really involved in schools, encouraging recess, active breaks and lessons in the classroom, more PE classes, sports, and then before and after school programs would be really good for kids to, learn how to be active with each other, structured and unstructured. Social support, so this applies to anyone and everyone, modeling and encouraging an active lifestyle for kids and for other family members, even your friends. So having a partner always makes things a lot easier. So, make goals as a family, grab a friend, your neighbor, whoever you want, and model each other, hold each other accountable, work with each other, set schedules, do what you need to do, but make sure you're supporting somebody else. It makes it a lot easier. Finally, not finally, I'm sorry, we have one more. So teaching your kids new skills. So teaching them how to regulate their physical activity, set goals, follow rules, and then use proper equipment. So having them participate in sports, PE, or even active lessons in the classroom helps them with learning these activities. And this could be applied to adults where you'll want to learn a new skill if you're transitioning from childhood to young adulthood. So if you did a sport in high school or something growing up and you no longer do that sport, you're going to want to learn a new skill so you can stay physically active. And finally, you'll want to set a basis for physical activity in children at a young age and expose them to a variety of activities in sports, competitive and non-competitive. So you'll want to include activities that adults also commonly do, so they're not in a difficult place if they stop doing a sport and now don't know what to do. So you can have them jog or hike with you, bike, take exercise classes, do strength training. And these are all things that you can do as a child and as an adult. So you aren't, scrambling to try to find something to do after you are no longer doing a sport. And then the last group that you would want to go for is incorporating physical activity into communities. And so I'm going to put up a list. These are in no particular order, but it will be a pyramid, but not one is not more important than the other. So starting with healthcare. So talk to your healthcare provider about how you can incorporate different activities into your life. And then if you are a healthcare provider in this talk, encourage your patients to be more physically active, give them resources to meet these guidelines. Education would be next. So in schools, with healthcare providers, in the communities, going to talks like this, make sure you're developing that knowledge, and make sure if you are an educator that you're educating your patients or your students about how to be active in their life. Participating in sports. So this is a really easy way to be physically active because sports normally are very fun. If you live in a close neighborhood, you can get a group together to play soccer or basketball. And there's other community groups that you can get together as well to do sports. And then also working with your public health department in the community, so they can provide resources for people to learn about how to be physically active and exercise. They can work with community recreation centers, and there are healthcare providers and public health departments that you can talk to as well. Faith-based settings, so church groups are a really great way to bring physical activity into your life. You can do things together that brings in that social support that I talked about before. Having a group to hold you accountable makes it a lot easier to be physically active. Community recreation centers, fitness centers, and parks, making those available. So if you're involved in your community in that way and you have the ability to provide more recreation centers for people, I highly encourage doing that. Giving people the resources to be physically active is a really important for a community. And then transportation, land use, and community design. So as you can see, if you live in Champaign, or many cities are starting to do this, but we have bike lanes. So that has to do with community design. So having a bike lane is really important for people to feel safe. That it gives them another opportunity to be physically active by transportation. And that's an easy way to meet those guidelines, is biking or walking to school or work or to the store, wherever you need to go. And then the last two would be business and industry and mass media. So if most people here, I'm sure, go to work, so you can get a group together at work. If you own a business, I would encourage you to encourage your employees to have small breaks throughout the day so they can at least put in some light physical activity. And then mass media, so particularly social media, is a really good way to learn about physical activity. You can follow a lot of fitness gurus on social media, and they'll give you a lot of opportunities and resources to bring in physical activity and exercise into your life. So my final points for you all are that young children should be as active as they can throughout the day. Children and adolescents should be doing 60 or more minutes of moderate to vigorous aerobic activity a day. Adults should be doing 150 to 300 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity a week. So that's at minimum 30 minutes per day for 5 days a week. And then lastly, this is like the big take home message, is move more and sit less. So if you cannot, do those moderate to vigorous activities, at least pull in some light activity, stand up a little bit more often, do some stretching, do some balancing. And here are some resources that I can provide for you guys, and I can put these in the chat as well, so these links can become hyperlinked. But the Department of Health and Human Services is the department that publishes the guidelines, and so that's the top. And then they also give some resources for people of all ages. And the American Heart Association is also a really good website that provides resources for people at school and at home to incorporate more physical activity into their life. And then join us next week where Brianna is going to talk about fermented foods and those effects on your gut microbiome. Lastly, if you could all just take our survey, you can take a picture of this QR code just with your camera and it'll give you a link to the survey. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Shelby. There was a few questions here. A couple of them had to do with muscle strengthening. I know that can you repeat what those major muscle groups were again?
Yeah, so if you think about the main portions of your body, so legs, arms, core, chest, and back.
Okay. Yeah, and someone was asking, is there one really good exercise or muscle strengthening activity to work all those groups? Do you have any resource for that or?
I can't think of one exercise that would work all of those groups. I will say that many exercises will do at least two. So things like squatting or lunging is good for your core and your legs because you have to keep stable as you start to bend towards the ground. Certain back activities can also work your arms. So most people don't do these, but pull-ups or just like hanging from a bar would work your shoulders and your arms and your back. Push-ups are good for your biceps, triceps, and chest. So there isn't one activity that could hit all of them, but many activities do at least two.
Okay, and someone asked related to that, where would you find information on muscle strengthening programs that they can sustain on a regular basis?
So I can give you the links, but some of those links have muscle strengthening activities for people. You can also go onto the American College of Sports Medicine website, and they have some activities. The National Strength and Conditioning would have activities. I can provide some more links and we can send those out if you want.
Okay, that's great. There's several others. I'm trying to get back to them.
Okay.
Because they were early on. Someone asked if they really like an exercise that they've been doing routinely, like Zumba, say, and after a while, their heart rate isn't raising like it did before. After so a while, they're asking, is that because they're conditioned now to the activity? Should they mix it up with something else, or is there something they can do to raise that?
No, yeah, that's exactly it. So as you exercise, your body adapts and you get healthier. So if your heart rate used to go up during a Zumba class and then it stopped, it's because your heart can handle that intensity at a lower level, which is a really good thing. So definitely switching things up. If you have the options in that class to do something more difficult, I know sometimes in classes, an instructor will say, if this is too easy, here's an alternative. So definitely shooting for the alternative and pushing yourself a little bit more.
Okay, that's great. Just kind of upping the intensity of
it,
it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Was there any, someone asked about the need, if you could talk a little bit about the need to rest for muscle recovery after certain types of physical activity?
Yep. So if you're doing muscular strengthening activity and even aerobic, because that has some muscle strengthening, if it's a new activity, I think the recommendation is about a 48-hour rest period. For kids, it's 48 to 72-hour rest period. And then I would also just suggest to listen to your body. If you're really sore after doing an activity one day, maybe take a rest for a day or two. If you feel okay the next day, then, it doesn't hurt to keep going.
Okay. All right. And then I think someone else asked about balance exercises. Could you suggest some at-home balance exercises?
Yeah, so things just
They're
like
adults.
yeah, so things like just standing on one leg, practicing standing on one leg, and I would not do that without any sort of support. So if you're, if you are cooking or cleaning or something and you want to try it on one leg, you could do that. If you're cooking and you're just staring at the food and stirring or something, stand on one leg and just like put your hand down on the counter. And that would help with balancing. That would build your core. That would build that leg muscle that you're standing on and make sure you're switching between legs. Um, some other things like standing up on your toes, on your tippy toes for a little bit. So you can practice being up on your toes.
Okay,
Um,
good suggestions. Yeah. Okay, and I'm trying to see if I missed any. I might have missed some things, I'm sure here, but I think for the most part, we do have the handout. There is a handout, and the webinar is being recorded, so that will be also available to review again if you'd like, or if you missed part of it. Um, and there is an evaluation that, besides the QR code, I put the evaluation in the chat box, the link. So I will put again in the chat box another link that goes to all of the webinars in the series and the evaluations and the handouts. So that is the one I just posted there. GoIllinois.edu Health Picks is a great one to go to get all of the information. Okay. Then also, again, your feedback is super important to us, and we really want to hear also like what are some of the topics you'd like to hear about in the future. So definitely, again, if you could fill out that evaluation, that would be super helpful to us to keep improving and to keep providing the information that you're looking for. So as Shelby said, next week on October 28th, we're going to be talking about fermented foods and the benefits of those. So with that, I'll just keep trying to answer. If you see anything, Shelby, in the chat box that I'm missing.
it looks like some people are answering each other.
Each other. I think any tips for if you have arthritis, some of the muscle strengthening they might do.
So the guidelines say that do what you can. If it hurts, don't do it. But I would definitely try various types of activities. I can't really give specific activities because it's different for everybody. But if something is not working, don't push yourself. Just try something else. I don't really study disabilities that much. So that's the best I can do, but I can give some more. I can give you a list of resources and we can send those out.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Someone asked, can you to do Tai Chi on the computer? I'm assuming they're asking about websites, maybe.
Yeah.
Or I'm maybe.
Probably. Nothing wrong with using technology in taking a Tai Chi class. Tai Chi is definitely a growing field, and especially in the older adult population, it really, really helps with balance and muscle strengthening. So I highly encourage Tai Chi or yoga or something like that, slow moving activities. Really, really great. I imagine those being talked about a lot more in the future. So.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for tuning in today. We hope that you join us again next week or on some of the other sessions. And again, I got the evaluation in the chat box one more time. And yeah, you can't do it enough, right?
Right.
And she's got it up there if you want to try to do it with the QR code. So thank you very, very much, everyone. Thanks, Shelby. It was great.
Thank you.